Good morning, everyone, from lovely grey Brussels. Can everyone hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect, it appears so well. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to ChargeUp Europe webinar on electrification of heavy-duty vehicles, or HDVs. For those of you who don't know us, ChargeUp Europe is the voice of EV charging industry in Brussels. And we are really glad to have all of you with us today for what will hopefully be an insightful discussion about where Europe stands on e-trucks and related infrastructure currently, where we expect to be in the coming years. And spoiler, predictions are that 500,000 e-trucks will be cruising European roads by 2030. And finally, what is needed to get there faster. Before I forget, and to be polite, my name is Zuzana Punčíková. I'm Director of Policy in Europe at EVBox. We were a Dutch and today are European and a global manufacturer of smart EV chargers, and we also provide software and services to CPOs. And this year we have the privilege to lead ChargeUp Europe as its president. Now, back to the webinar, it will be split in two parts. First, Arthur D. Little will present their research on the topic commissioned by ChargeUp Europe. And second, we will have a panel discussion among industry experts and also a perspective from an important policymaker. Before I pass the mic, two housekeeping rules. One, if you have a question, don't be shy, put it in the chat. And second, link to the first, I hate to be a bad cop, but I have to be very strict on the timing to make sure precisely that we get to your questions. So, dear speakers, please limit your answers to a couple of minutes per question, with the exception of Thomas Knoblinger from Arthur D. Little, who will have 10 minutes to present the results of their research. So with that, Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Susanna, and also very welcome from our side. Very happy to be here today and to present the main insights of our recent study on truck electrification that we have prepared for ChargeUp Europe. And I hope that these insights will spark a very good conversation afterwards. But then I would say let's jump directly into the presentation. So, Gabriele, could we please move to the first slide? When starting this research, obviously we have started to look first on what's driving this market, and if we look on the commercial vehicle market, typically this is TCO, but when it comes to zero emission trucks, this is now, of course, at the beginning mainly driven by regulation and incentives. And when we look at the slide now, we see the latest proposal of the EU Commission on truck decarbonization targets. And this is actually quite ambitious. So by 2030, all truck OEMs must reduce their CO2 emissions of new fleets by 45%. And very important, if they don't manage to do it, they will have to pay hefty fines. Yeah, the regulation seems to work, because if we look one slide further, we see an overview of the zero emission truck sales targets of the major OEMs in Europe by 2030. And as you can see, they are quite ambitious. So the European truck market is a very concentrated market. So 7 brands own 96% of the market share, of the total market share. And almost all of the 7 brands have presented quite ambitious CO2 zero emission sales targets by 2030, with a clear focus on the electric powertrain. And if we build a weighted average of the targets based on the current market shares, we expect that if OEMs deliver to the plans, they will sell 42% of the new trucks by 2030 already with electric powertrains. What does this mean? If we look one slide further, if truck OEMs deliver to the promise, we will actually see a very steep uptake of the fleet, of the electric truck fleet in Europe, resulting in 500,000 trucks altogether by 2030. Could we go one slide further, please? Yeah, so we expect that by the end of the decade, we will end up with 500,000 electric trucks on Europe's road, which is massive. And only between 2025 and 2030, the number of electric trucks will grow tenfold from 50K to 500K. This already would represent 8% of the total truck fleet in Europe by then. And what we can see is that the electrification of the truck space is starting later than in the light vehicle space, but it's actually expected to be a lot faster. If we look one slide further, we can also see that truck electrification will not happen at the same space for different driving use cases. Because adoption is depending on availability of adequate vehicles, TCO advantage, and dependency on public charging infrastructure. For example, in the short-haul applications with urban and regional delivery, we often see positive TCO advantages already today. The necessity for public charging infrastructure is not there, and therefore we expect that by 2025, 80% of the electric trucks will be used on short routes, and until the end of the decade, also medium haul trucks will play a major role in the electric space. Long-haul electric trucks, on the other hand, who are relying heavily on public charging infrastructure, we don't see that they kick off the market before 2027. If we then go one slide further, we obviously see that fueling this electric truck fleet requires massive investments in charging infrastructure across Europe. So altogether, we expect a demand of 360,000 truck chargers overall in Europe. The majority, 80%, will be in truck depots and will be DC chargers, but lower power chargers of below 150 kilowatt. But we should not underestimate also the relevance of public charging. So already by 2030, we would require 16,000 public fast chargers, where more than half of the charging infrastructure has charging output power of more than 600 kilowatt. Yeah, if we go one slide further, we can see that charging infrastructure is only one side of the medal. We also should not forget the infrastructure behind the meter, because truck electrification will also have a significant impact on renewable energy generation and on electricity grids. So by 2030, the forecasted truck fleet will consume an additional annual consumption of 36 terawatt hours, which is more or less 1% of the total electricity consumption in the European Union today. So this is massive. And on the other hand, and probably even more challenging, we also need to expand the electricity grids, especially in the DSO space, to connect all these chargers. And from this perspective, we also expect additional grid connection power required of approximately 30 terawatt hours by 2030. If we move one slide further, I think I mentioned it in the beginning, especially the long-haul electric trucking is very depending on public charging infrastructure. And the main driver for the deployment of public charging infrastructure today is the recently approved AFIR regulation. What we did in our investigation is that we compared the total charging output power of the current AFIR regulation with the market, with the charging demand of our market model. And we have done this separately for public fast charging and for public overnight charging. In general, I think we can see that the AFIR is in the right magnitude to build a basis charging network across Europe, but the ambition level varies a bit between public fast charging and public overnight charging. So in the public fast charging, we can see that the AFIR target infrastructure is 30 to 40% below our forecast. So what does it mean? This seems to be adequate for the basis infrastructure across Europe and for laggard countries, but it's clear that in front-runner markets, which is currently the DACH area, Benelux and Scandinavia, a lot more infrastructure needs to be deployed. On the other hand, in the public overnight charging, we can see that the AFIR is actually quite ambitious. In 2027, we expect even a bit of an overbuild, and it matches the 2030 forecast quite well. Yeah. If we move to the last page, I only want to give a short outlook beyond 2030, because although the growth in truck electrification is quite significant in absolute numbers, the really big growth of this market will happen in the next decade. And yeah, when we start from the left-hand side, we can see that total truck fleet, that we expect electric trucks to become the dominant heavy-duty propulsion form after 2030, resulting in more than 2 million electric trucks by 2040. And also, obviously, charger demand and grid connection power will increase accordingly. For grid connection, we expect the biggest growth between 2030 and 2035. Afterwards, we expect that charge point utilizations will increase and that the growth lowers down. Yeah, thank you for your attention so far. I hope these insights spark a very good conversation with our panelists, and I would now hand back to Susanna.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Very interesting and relevant research, and great to hear that truck electrification is underway and EV charging is there to support it. Call out that this research is free of charge to ChargeUp Europe members, so do not hesitate to get in touch if you would like to join us, join our membership. Now let's move to the panel. We have 5 distinguished speakers joining us today, and I'll do my best to pronounce the names right. MEP, or Member of the European Parliament, Jakob Dalunde, will be joining us just in a while, but whom we already have on the call are Hilmar van den Daal, General Manager of e-mobility at Shell Recharge, Jason Dong, Senior Manager for EU Policy at ChargePoint, Niels Gunnar Wagstedt, Director of Technical Affairs at Scania, and Henrik Engdahl, Business Development Director at Volvo Trucks. So I would suggest that we delve immediately into obstacles and enabling conditions for the electrification of the HDV segment. From the EV charging side, the obvious enablers are sufficient land, fast grid connection, and sufficient or faster grid connection and sufficient power supply. And I would love to hear from our speakers whether these conditions, in their view, would make a sufficient and strong business case to switch to electric trucks, or whether they see any other relevant aspects. Let's start with you, Hilmar from Shell Recharge. So obviously you are responsible for building out charging infrastructure for fleets and trucks. Well, what is it that you are hearing from the market and from customers, and what challenges do you run into?
Yeah, thanks, Susanna. Well, our customers in the first place are increasingly wanting to transition to low carbon solutions, and we help them then with the charging infra at the depot locations as well as in the public on the go space. Their questions are mainly on affordability and the availability of the solutions, which, if you think about it, are quite business critical, right? The wrong technology choices can have quite an impact. Now, maybe to illustrate it with one example, last week I was in San Francisco and with FedEx Ground, where we give e-depot solutions. It's a US example, but I think there's good relevance because in the US there's quite a lot happening, as all of you know for sure. Now, here in this example, we talk about a brand new depot where every night 110 quite big trucks come in and they park so that between 3 and 8 in the morning they get filled with all these packages for last mile delivery. And you can look at sort of 3 actors there. So FedEx Ground is the customer with a main concern when we started about the grid. Is there sufficient capacity to charge 30% of those vehicles being an EV now? But also, is it future proof? Because they've committed to the municipality to become 100% EV in a couple of years. So it needs to have the grid capacity guaranteed. Then secondly, if you talk to the depot manager, he basically was concerned with reliability and affordability again, because they don't deliver the packages themselves. It's business partners that expect that in the morning the truck is charged and that the kilowatt hour price is affordable. And here he was mainly the investment made needed government incentives to make the charging infra be at a cost level that the users could actually afford the kilowatt hour price. And then last but not least, I spoke to one of these so-called independent service providers, and that's the one who owns the trucks and employs the driver. So the entrepreneur who has to decide between an e-truck and a fossil one. And this guy had started the business 6 months ago, had invested 1.2 million and decided to buy 3 e-trucks. And that was only possible because of significant government grants, because he looks at total cost of ownership. So how does running an e-truck compare to a diesel truck, but also at the absolute investment, can he finance it? So in speaking with customers, I sense there's a huge appetite and confidence sort of in electric trucks, but realistically, one has to ensure the grid is ready, the vehicles are at TCO parity with fossil, and that they can be financed.
Thank you very much, Hilmar, for sharing that. So clearly, business case there already. What about you, Jason? What do you see on the side of ChargePoint? So both in regard to the market and customers and any challenges that they face.
Sure, yeah. First, I can just lay a bit about what we currently offer kind of our customers in this space. So basically, we will enable these customers to, from the beginning of their journey to electrifying their fleet until they have a lot of chargers, a lot of trucks, we will be their partner throughout this entire electrification journey. So what we'll do in the beginning, when we first kind of talk to customers, is we kind of address what their needs are and provide a solution kind of in terms of telematics to understand them, to help them understand which fleets they can electrify first, which lines, which trucks, what part of their distance they can electrify first. We'll help them with route planning. So this data will all tell us about which trucks I should go for first, maybe the shorter ones, route planning, etc., how to do it, and then we can provide them the hardware in this situation as well. I think from the beginning, having these discussions from the beginning right up until they have, let's say, in the future, when they'll have a lot of the lines electrified, is crucial, because you have to think about in the beginning, and with a lot of these customers, a lot of the people you're talking to directly, let's say the fleet managers, they're not experts in, electrification of trucks. So it's really about education from the beginning, knowledge building, and then we can really concretely provide them with solutions to help electrify their fleets. And I think further to what Hilmar was saying, this TCO is huge for a lot of these companies, especially when you think, they're much more or less irrational actors than people in the passenger car segment. It's just very different segments here, and they're really not going to change to electrify no matter how much they want to, unless the TCO is there. And then further going off of what Hilmar said, subsidies from governments in this space do really help, as opposed to in the passenger car space where there's a lot of market competition. It's the subsidies for A, the trucks, of course, and B, the chargers can really help. There's the subsidies in Germany right now. I believe there were ones in Sweden to some extent. I'm not sure if they're still there at this point in the year, but those are very helpful in helping these companies electrify their fleets. And I think another thing we have to think about here when we talk about the grids, talk about the amount of, let's say, stress it will take upon the grids, is keeping in mind the smart energy management. And this is also about education and knowledge building, is that eventually you'll get to a point where the customer may think, oh, well, we need a lot of chargers because we have a lot of trucks and we're going to have, all of this, we're going to need to charge them at the same time. But that's not true. You're going to have a lot of smart energy management. Some trucks need to go, right in the morning, and leave and do, a distance 4 hours. Others may leave later in the day. So it's really about controlled charging and ensuring that you have you don't need, massive, like let's say 10 chargers. You can do the amount of charging with smart energy management with potentially half, depending on, again, knowing which fleets you need to charge now, and knowing which lines you need to charge now, and doing that effectively and again through the smart energy management. That's what I would say is what we're seeing in the market.
Thank you, Jason. So clearly customer experience, education, as well as subsidies, very important. Going back to you, Hilmar, if I may, what is Shall Recharge doing, or what do you think is needed to actually solve some of the challenges that were mentioned, despite the success stories that are clearly there today, as you had shared first?
Yeah, we often start helping customers with a so-called glide path, which is like a diagnosis of their vehicle fleet, their needs, and then trying to link it with available technology, regulations, and put it really into context so they can take well-informed decisions on how to approach both the fleet and the infra-related transition. Now, if I give a real-life example from Germany, for example, there we work with a company called Rhenus Contago. That's a large container shipping company where we provide charging points in 14 of their terminal locations, but also batteries to buffer the energy and a wider energy management system that takes into account the use of power for the other applications. Because what is important to realize for the customer, it's not just about electrifying some trucks. They have a bigger facility with buildings that use electricity, or in this case, with cranes that pick up containers and they put them down. So you get pluses and minuses of energy, which do something to your on-site power system. And it's a bit tapping into what Jason said. You need to look at that wider system of what is the available energy, what comes from renewables, what comes from the grid, and how do you make that all work together in a way that you don't go over the capacity that you have, and that you use the energy in the economically most sensible way. So there's really a need there, and where companies like ourselves and ChargePoint and others try and play a role. for them. Now, the good thing with this project, what I like, is that both Contago and our SBRS company have won the German Sustainability Award for that one. So there's something there about being able to integrate the pieces. Now, there's another important integration, which customers can, some of them might fully rely on charging in a depot, but many will need a combination of depot charging with public, with the on-the-go. So when they drive from whatever, Spain to the Ukraine or Denmark to the south of Italy, that they find infrastructure where they need it. And that's a bit of the tricky thing with the moonshots. We say people commit to so many trucks or to so much infra, but it needs to be where the driver has to take the stop, because if there it gets stranded, or they need to wait in a queue to be able to charge. That's the every minute counts in the operations of the customers. And so working at customer backwards and really figuring out where do they need it? And that's things that we do normally when we work with companies like Contago or FedEx, is look also at the on-the-go demand and say, what are your routes and where can we help provide the on-the-go structure to have it? And our competitors do the same. And at the end of the day, you need all those competitors to have redundancy in the network and to really have optionality for the customers, because they will work with multiple suppliers, etc. Now, to make it all possible, a few more points in terms of what is necessary in terms of regulatory interventions. And I know a lot of this will be discussed in the EU at the moment. So three things. Firstly, in many places today, the incentives to invest in infrastructure are still needed to make a viable business case. A bit to the US example, it worked because of the incentive. So continuation of a variety of funding mechanisms is needed. And there's one very critical example here is the credit mechanism for public EV charging, which exists in the Renewable Energy Directive. And I hope our fellow panel member from the European Parliament is already here. Otherwise, I need to repeat it later. But I think that the point is that Shell, like many others in the industry, has been vocal that the mechanism of credit needs to be extended to the private charging locations. So that also the charging at a depot, which is in the use case of most of the customers of Scania and Volvo, etc., they need, there we have Jacob Dalunde as well. Welcome. I was just asked Jacob to talk about some of the European interventions that are needed. And I was making the case that indeed the Renewable Energy Directive, and particularly the way that's translated into local legislation, that it recognizes also charging in the depot, which will be the primary use of energy for those buying Volvo trucks and Scania trucks, that also the credit generation extends to these private locations and not just the public, because customers will use a mixture of that. And if you really want to make it viable, the investment in infra, the investment in the trucks, and getting to the right TCO, then that credit mechanism is incredibly important. A second point is around the grid. The EU's electricity market design could provide a significant boost for investment certainty in the charging infra, but only if the member states agree on these anticipatory investments in the grid capacity and in transparent and enforceable timelines for the grid connection requests. Yeah, that uncertainty around permits is always a big one. There's a third point around standardization and data sharing, but I'm going to park it to give time for other speakers. Back to you, Susanne.
Great. Thank you very much, Hilmar. And indeed, warm welcome to MEP Dalunde, who has now joined us, and we will give him the floor shortly to discuss the ongoing legislative developments in the European Parliament. But before that, I would like also to ask Nils Gunnar and Henrik to share the perspectives of electric truck manufacturers, OEMs, what it is, what's the situation that you see from your side, what it is that you are looking for in charging partners. Niels Gunnar, would you like to go first?
Yes, I can start. Very much of what's said from Hilmar and Jason already applies, and I will repeat some of them because they are so essential. And we start with the total cost of ownership for customers. And in our business or in the customer's business, so operating trucks for transport, total cost of ownership is number 1, 2, and 3, and there's no number 4. If you don't have that, you will not survive. You will not survive. And that's, I say, the hesitation today. Everyone loves to drive the trucks. They really see it works. It's not about the technology. It's robust. It does a job. But if you cannot foresee the cost over life, you will be eventually doing harm to yourself and your own company. So total cost of ownership is first, second, and third. Well, the next thing is how to do anything about it. And I think that's where we need incentives to focus not on new technology introduction. It's not about that. We're again, technology is stable, but the use of the technology implementation of that, and if you take the grid connection costs, and it's very much like knowledge is not there for either customers or other active parties in this transport ecosystem. I would say the analogy is like you're used to go to a very good restaurant and you trust the chefs to give you a dish that will be good for you. Now you come into a completely new restaurant with complete long list of dishes. You can't even spell them out. You don't know what they are. If they are in your allergies, which you have a lot of, will it eventually kill you if you eat it? And even if you buy one of them dishes and it will be delicious, that's not a problem. The cost of it when you pay it afterwards is 50% more than when you order it half an hour earlier. I mean, you wouldn't trust that restaurant with your life. And this is more or less the new play here. Operators, transport hauliers, they are used to work with complicated systems and find out how to best optimize their transport, how they optimize the use. We heard the American example is that's everyday business. It's just that it's so many new parameters coming in here. So we need to help every one of us, including policymakers and others, to make this a fair game, an understanding. It doesn't necessarily need to be much more cheap or less in cost, but it needs to be foreseeable in cost over life. Otherwise, this ramp up will not take place. Thank you.
Thank you, Niels Gunnar. And Henrik from Volvo Truck side, could you share some insights as well?
I should have something smart to say that others haven't said, right? I think you completed a lot of the things. I'll take half a step back. Consistency, whatever policy we put in place in the slightly bigger scheme needs to remain. We need to continue to say that, well, CO2 is something that we need to take away, right? We also need to acknowledge that, well, we will not transform this industry with subsidies alone. We need to make the alternative higher priced. This is the thing that ultimately can drive this to the bitter end. And apart from this, we also unfortunately need to look a little bit beyond 2030. Even if our sales targets are high, ambitious, and we will reach them, the rolling fleet at that point in time will only be a fraction of the complete fleet, meaning the need for charging infrastructure will continue to grow for a very long period of time after this. So that to be considered. And the last thing I will add as well, we need, I was about to say oil, but I mean lubrication. We need to get people like us into the loop. Perhaps we should add 1 or 2 more parties, somebody representing the drivers and somebody representing the transport purchasing companies, together in order to make this this fire get started really properly, right? We are all needed in this transformation to make it happen in the end. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Henrik, also for a very concise answer. We very much like those. So to wrap up or summarize the interventions, I guess 3 key points. 1, customers clearly want e-trucks. B, business case is already there. But C, total cost of ownership, works, but still could make use of subsidies and incentives, particularly in this inception phase of HDV sector development. And with that, let's move to legislative developments with a couple of questions, especially on MEP Dalunde. So we all know and impatiently await the vote in the European Parliament next week, hopefully with an adoption of CO2 emission targets on trucks. What we have seen already in the ENVI committee is that there is an alignment between the Parliament and the 2040 target proposed by the Commission and also supported by the Council. 2 questions to you, if I may, Mr. Dalunde. First, could you share with us a bit more on the state of play in the European Parliament and what are your expectations of how the vote will unfold next week? And second, do you believe this is in line with the market projections that we have been discussing so far? Mr. Dalunde, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you. Sorry for the late accession to this meeting. I had some technical issues with Microsoft. I'm going to call for the shorting of their stock. The process to join was quite frustrating, I have to say. I'm now joining from my girlfriend's Apple computer instead of the work Microsoft computer. So it was more easy to join through the web version Safari rather than the app from a Microsoft computer. Interesting. Regarding the legislative process, as was mentioned, we've now had 3 parallel processes in the 3 relevant committees of the Parliament: the Committee of Transport, the Committee of Industry and Energy and Telecom and Research, and Committee of Environment. And I negotiated on behalf of the Greens in the Transport Committee and in the Industry and Energy Committee. And in both those cases, from our Green point of view, the result was quite bad. So we voted no. We got better results in the Environment Committee, where we voted yes. And as long as the plenary comes to a proposal which is closer aligned to the ENVI position, we will vote yes. But if it's closer to the ENVI or the ITRE or TRAN committees, we will likely vote no. And I think the most crucial issue is the role of biofuels. We are, of course, positive to the use of sustainable biofuels when it comes to the reduction of the emissions of the fleet that is already rolling on our roads. But we shouldn't confuse that with actually zero emission. Sustainable biofuels can make some reduction as long as it's actually sustainable biofuels, but it's not zero emission. So that should not be counted towards the zero emission target. And I'm a bit worried that the majority of the Parliament would go for that route. And in that case, we as Greens will vote no. Because I think that the sector needs investment clarity, that electric is the route going forward. And we shouldn't confuse that with using biofuels to reduce the emissions of the fleet that is already rolling on our roads. So that will, I think, be the deciding factor. And if we Greens vote no, that might actually be enough to take the proposal back to committee, because we might vote no because of the lack of ambition, and the far right might vote no because it's too ambitious. So that might take us back to committee, which is what happened when we voted on the emissions trading system half a year ago. So I can only call for all stakeholders to call their members of parliament and make sure that they vote no to allowing biofuels to be counted towards emissions reductions when it comes to newly sold vehicles. It should only be used for reducing the emissions of the trucks already rolling on our roads. And there are enough, even if we would sell sell only zero emission trucks on our roads today, there will still be enough trucks rolling on our streets already today to smash through our climate targets. So there will be a lot of measures that will need to be taken to reduce the emissions of the already rolling fleet, and the fleet, the trucks that are being sold onto the market needs to be zero emission from now on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dalunde. Really appreciate you sharing a very honest remarks on the situation in the parliament. We hear you, and we'll definitely reach out to your colleagues, and we'll keep fingers crossed that the file doesn't go back to the committee. And you're absolutely right on the e-trucks. We also do need legal clarity, which is something that we have been discussing also early in the webinar. I very much hope that you can stay with us a little bit longer.
Sure.
Because we would love to still, hear any comment that you may have on what you will hear from the industry experts we have on the panel. Thank you again. Well, with that, shall we move to cover and discuss industry preparedness? As we heard from Arthur D. Little presenting their research on trucks electrification at the beginning of the webinar, we are moving forward at quite a swift pace. And although today we are still at the inception stages, we expect the EHDV segment to ramp up quite rapidly by 2030 and consolidate by 2040. So I have a couple of questions, especially first to our OEM speakers. Perhaps we go with Henrik first. In your experience, is it easy to make the case to customers that total cost of ownership is better for e-trucks than for fossil fuel trucks? And are high upfront costs a major deterrent, or do you see anything else? So Henrik from Volvo Trucks, if you don't mind going first.
The boring answer is that we have different kinds of applications where it makes different amounts of sense, right? If you're not driving a lot, then you will have a penalty from the high investment costs and the slightly less impact on your operating costs. If you're driving many kilometers, then for sure it's easier to make the business case fly. So we do see in some cases where we can make it fly. We then usually need to have quite a bit of charging along the way during the day in order to reach the distances that we do need to drive in order to make this work out, right? That is one perspective. Another one is in the cases where you're not really allowed to use any other trucks than the battery electric trucks. If you go into cities which do not allow any other kind of propulsion, then the business case is rather easy to calculate, because otherwise you simply don't have a business if you go with a combustion engine. And with regards to upfront costs, financial services is nothing new for any one of us, I think. So we can turn a high upfront cost to a monthly or yearly cost, whichever that is chosen. However, the total cost of that investment is still to be offset by the operating costs, which is then what we need to make sure we do with a lot of mileage, with cheap charging, and of course with good truck products as well that will withstand this and work all over the time that they need.
Thank you, Henrik. Shall we then move to Scania and Niels Gunnar? Either the same question or an alternative. How do you see an outlook for HDV electrification and what it is that Scania is currently focusing on? What are your next commercial milestones that you are most excited about?
Yeah, what we are focusing on this electrification is a prime direction of the company in this direction. And I think that what we are excited about, it sounds like far future 2030, but it's actually only 6 years away, where we see up to 50% or even more than 50% of our products will be full electric vehicles newly sold. Still, there is a 50% yet, those that are not electric in 2030. And I come back to that, and I think I say the same thing as Henrik, that we start where you have a definite positive opportunity for the customer to have a stable TCO over life, including investment, including cost of energy, and so on. And that is in those applications where you can cover, together with the customer, cover the charging, even help them out in production of electricity if needed, but also in those operations where you go from A to B very many times, and where you can control your charging in one of the spots or in both ends of this travel. And when you can fulfill that, it is a very good business today already. When we go to the extent of the product portfolio over to long distance truck, it's not a positive case today. So the transition is to move into more and more of the long distance, need of public chargers, and also again, need of understanding of the total cost of operation scenario. We transfer applications over applications. So it's a very positive route forward. We are very clear on the direction, and we know about the target in 2030 that we need to fulfill. We saw in the presentation of RTD Little, the consequences of not fulfilling this will be a very high cost, and eventually incentives or alternative costs, both those will drive this direction. It will be too costly for OEMs, for operators, for everyone to not use this technology. So we will see a very positive direction. We are not that positive at the moment about the speed of transfer. So I think, just as we said, meetings like this and getting together and trying to make the education that this will happen. If we connect forces, that is very important to spread the message. This will happen, and it needs to happen fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Niels Gunnar. Now let's move to the operators' perspective on the EV charging side, and I will pick on you, Hilmar. Do you think the market is actually ready now?
Yes, I do think the market is ready today. So we shouldn't be tricked into thinking that nothing is happening, and that players like any of those here are waiting for the stars and regulations to align. Maybe an example is 2 weeks ago we opened in Eindhoven in the Netherlands a so-called energy hub, where we sell many different fuels, bio LNG, hydrotreated vegetable oil, but also fast charging. So we have there 300 kilowatt chargers, 100% renewable energy. We launched a book and charge system, which many of the operators ask, so that they can trust that when a driver comes to a location like this, that there's really a slot, a parking bay with charging available, so their journey can go as planned. So that's happening. And when we add there all things, toilets, showers, dining options, to really make that customer journey good. But I think, so they are ready, but just to reiterate that what we need is a holistic approach. You need to sync demand and supply, not not in a spreadsheet at European level, at location level, at customer journey level. And that means, so yes, we need policies that enable commercial investment in charging infra, investment in trucks, but also ensuring that it's economically viable for the customers that are supposed to use it. Because if they don't use our infra or the trucks that Niels, Gunnar, and Henrik are selling then we're not going to achieve anything. Now, one other plea is, and that's also looking at the OEM colleagues, peers, partners here, if we want the users to have a smooth experience that is comparable to driving fuel trucks, we do need harmonized standards, and we need seamless exchange of data, between all the parties involved, because standardization of standards charging systems like the megawatt chargers that we are developing now will improve user friendliness. But then you need policies that enable a level playing field with this effective data exchange between the parties. Because we spoke about, and Jason spoke about it, others about, if you want fleet management services and energy management services, which all tap into user experience and cost management, you do need to know the state of the battery of the vehicle, and the state of the battery on the site. And all types of telematics type data and CPO, sort of charge point operation data. My team works a lot of partnerships, and typically people sometimes try and be clever, keep data for themselves, figure out a business model to control everything. If I look at it, it's such a complex system, and we all need to collaborate to make it work. And I don't think any of us here or other ones will be a Tesla-like player that will have sort of a deck of cards in their hands where they can control everything. So it's really a big plea for also the European Parliament to focus at level playing field in data exchange, and anybody working partnerships to go in there with sort of a trust that if we make it work for the customer, that we can also make it work for our companies to play a role in that going forward. So in short, it's happening. Everybody in this call is making their moves. Progress is made, but to really scale it up, we need to collaborate and have very good regulation as well.
Thank you very much, Hilmar. So clearly a solid case study that the market is ready. Jason, how does ChargePoint see that? Do you agree with Hilmar, or do you have different perspective?
No, I can only agree, of course, that we are doing it now, and as Hilmar said, the industry is doing it currently. For instance, we like to talk about, or at least some policymakers have also talked about how this is a theoretical concept, HTV electrification, how it's going to come in the future. But we at ChargePoint are also doing this now. But as we saw in the Arthur Doolittle introduction, that the majority of HTV tracking electrification is going to happen in private depots. That's where we're starting as well. One of our customers in the north of Sweden, in a very I can't remember the name now off the top of my head, but it's in a very north part where it's very cold and it snows a lot. And that part is important because we always think about electrification and cold and the battery losses and stuff like this. But our customer there, Webucks, it's a chemical company. They're using a 64-ton truck to do their kind of deliveries. We provide them with a 150 kilowatt charger, and it's also very important because in the realm of electric trucking, that's not exactly super fast, or it's not a, let's say, megawatt amount of power capacity, but it fits their needs fine because they also use kind of they're only kind of trialing one truck at the moment, mostly because they wanted to, again, and further to what I was talking about before, is just dipping their toes into the water with electric trucking. They were trialing the delivery system out. So then, and for chemical reasons and for loading chemicals, they have to take around an hour to load the truck because for various reasons, of course, you can't just quickly load chemicals onto a heavy truck. So in that amount of time, they're able to charge with that 150 kilowatt charger, and they are able to, manage to deliver make their deliveries in that amount of time. And I think that goes to show that they're able to do it, with private depot charging. They have said they will not need to do public charging for their electric truck, and they would 100% order more trucks. It's just that there's currently in unavailability of the trucks, and there's the long lead times. And that's not to put pressure on my OEM colleagues here. It's more just to show that it is viable today. We are doing it now, and it just goes to show again that we don't need to think about it in a theoretical concept, and we need to think about then ensuring, I'd say what Mr. De Lunde was saying, that we need to give industry certainty, avoiding issues like potentially having e-fuels in new fleets moving forward in the new HDV file, and as well thinking about the other aspects, let's say the enabling conditions from a policy perspective, such as how to incentivize, how to accelerate, let's say, permitting and grid issues, especially in private locations, because again, the majority of this will take place in private depots, and we need to ensure that we can get grid connections where it's needed and where it's done very fast. And I think we as ChargeUp Europe have a lot of actually good messaging and good information on what is needed to help accelerate grid connections, especially for electric trucks.
Thank you, Jason. So to summarize this part of the debate, clearly the industry is prepared, as well as upbeat and motivated, but the costs are still high. There are still some obstacles like slow grid connection. The speed is slow, and there is a lot of work ahead for all of us. So the collaboration will be very important. I would like to ask MEP Dalunde if there is anything that he has heard that he would like to react to or share any other thoughts from his side. MEP Dalunde?
Yes, thank you. I noticed earlier in the discussion that there was some discussion regarding subsidies or carrot versus a stick. And I think regardless if you're a horse or a person or a trucking company, you generally prefer carrots over sticks. The problem though is that carrots aren't free; they need to be paid for, and currently public funds are a scarce resource, and there are other parts of society that are in request of public funding. Not only the usual suspects as schools or education, but also the defense sector is now asking for those funds. So I think that we need to be clever in the way that we balance this. Yes, of course, we need some subsidies, but I think specifically for the charging infrastructure, maybe less so for the trucks. And I think that we should focus more on the stick when it comes to the trucks. However, here we need to be thinking long term, because if we introduce too much carbon pricing in the very short term, we risk killing the patient, in the sense that those operators that would need to have some funds for buying the electric trucks might spend all their money paying for the carbon pricing and therefore not be able to buy the electric trucks. However, if we signal that in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, there will be a trajectory of carbon pricing, so that the purchasers of trucks know that they will need to buy those trucks in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, then we create the investment certainty, both for the manufacturers of the trucks, for the deployment of infrastructure, but also for the purchasers, the operators of the trucks, that they know that in 5 years, in 10 years, they will need to buy those trucks. So if they know that in 5 or 10 years they will have to pay substantially more for running their old diesel trucks, that will change their perspective. So that I think is an important mindset, that we need the sticks for the trucks, but there needs to be a trajectory, and those revenues that are raised by the public by those sticks should be used to pay for the expansion of the infrastructure of the charging network. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MEP Dalunde. Unless there are any final reactions from the panel, I could count to 1, 2, 3. Don't see any hand up. So with that, I would really like to thank very much all the wonderful panelists for this insightful debate. I would like to dedicate the last 10 minutes of the webinar to give the space to the questions from the audience. I understand we have received a couple, but unfortunately I cannot see them. In which case I will just read them from the WhatsApp chat that we have with the ChargeUp Europe Secretariat. And I will be looking for volunteers for the answers. So first question, are public fast charging stations and public overnight charging stations generally located in the same area, or are they usually separated locations? Very interesting and relevant question, and I would pick on Jason and ChargePoint to answer it.
I think when we look at public charging stations for heavy duty vehicles, this market is going to be very different from where we can conceptualize passenger car kind of public charging stations. I mean, if you look at what Hilmar said, what they're doing in terms of public charging stations, that's not something you see necessarily every day, kind of co-location with other alternative fuels. In other areas, you're going to have kind of the creation of heavy-duty electric vehicle-specific highway rest stops, for instance, where it's just only for heavy-duty electric vehicles, or maybe co-located with passenger cars. I think you can and could see also this co-location of private overnights, or not private overnight. So what was the question? Overnight and public charging as well, but it may be closer to cities. So you wouldn't see it on, let's say, the highway rest stops, but you could see it around what we have in the AFIR called the urban nodes, these areas where there's a lot of train stations, airport nearby, these kinds of areas where you have that business case where you could, for instance, overnight public charge your truck, and then you're close to the highway, so then you go, or your, commercial deliveries, you've made your delivery, you're moving away. I think you're going to see a lot of different types of business models coming through in the next coming years, especially once we have the MCS standard.
Thanks, Jason. Second question we received is, how do you foresee heavy-duty vehicle EV charging payment? Any takers to answer this one?
Yeah, I can give that a go, Susanna.
Thank you very much.
In principle, there is, if you look at those driving trucks, they're typical, let's say, card customers of companies like the company that I work for, Shell, or other traditional oil companies, or the DKVs, and well, there's many multi-branded cards, etc. I think those typically do and will play a role here as well. And then you'll see new apps and things come up. Now, the bigger question is, like it's always been in the fuel world, how do those that have both infrastructure and an MSP, we call these MSPs, how do they play that? Today in Europe, most is still interoperable. So to make networks available for everybody, in principle, a Shell network or a ChargePoint network will be available for MSPs. And I think we should keep that, because if I look at the US where it's different, separated, that's a very big limitation if you can only access part of the network whilst the network isn't yet so dense and redundant. So we'll see that. You also see it opening up for credit cards. Like in the UK, we see a lot more credit card, debit card type payments. I think the only thing, and this goes big into the discussion of the Mess- and Eichrecht in Germany, if you force complex payment technology to be put on every charger, you simply increase significantly the bill of the energy transition. So it's more of a plea, also looking at the political side of this spectrum, let the market do its job. If expensive technology is unnecessarily forced into the value chain here, we just make the whole energy transition more difficult, full stop. Yeah, so, but it will be a mixture of apps and cards, let's say it like that.
Thank you, Hilmar. Unless there are any additions from other speakers, I would move to the next question. And the audience, you still have about 3 minutes to submit your questions. So if you have any pressing one, please make sure to put it in the chat function now. In the meantime, I will read to you a third one I saw we have received, which is there a risk that we get into a two-speed situation, meaning cheaper freight prices through fossil HDV and more expensive freight through EV HDV? Any panelists that would like to chime in first to share their views?
I think it's back to what we said before, right? Some application, it will make sense to go electric earlier because they are on TCO parity. And in some others, it will be more expensive to start off with. But you will not be able to see that on your parcel delivery note in the end. It was more expensive because it was EV driven. It's averaging out all over the transports.
Indeed, thank you, Henrik. Anyone else who would like to show more in this?
I think it goes along with Mr. Delonde talking about the trajectories. We need to understand the future and sort of hinder that sort of transition to move and use the wrong energy because it's cheaper. It should not be cheaper. It should be more costly to do that. And that is how we set up policies and so for the different actors and countries in Europe.
Thank you, Nils Gunnar. Indeed, it's always a combination of regulatory carrots and sticks, right? To make the least climate-friendly option more expensive to effectively help build the business case for the more climate-friendly one. Anyone else who still wants to come in before I get to the next question? Nope. Then let's go with the next one, which is, do we have standardized access way to the charging stations for trucks as commercial vehicles? So question about standardized access.
What is meant with access way?
That's what I'm trying to figure out, but unfortunately I do not have more details. So anything on standardization of access? Or otherwise, who submitted the question? Could you elaborate?
I can go about
further?
a second on that one. And I say you need standardized access. The physical access to the charger need to be adapted to the long distance or heavy trucks of up to, here in Sweden, we're trying, or in Sweden, we're trying 34 meters. You cannot access that vehicle into a pass car charger. So that kind of access need to be more or less standardized. And the best standard of today is to use the size of the parking spots of today's parking for heavy vehicles. The standardization of the access through the charger is very much on its way with the mega charger system, MCS. It's not finally there yet, but it is on the way. and that would allow to have charging capacity up to 1 megawatt or even more of charging capacity. So it's incredibly powerful, and it's, as I said, on its way to be standardized during next year.
Thank you,
maybe
Mr.
one build, Susanna, maybe one build if you allow
Go
me.
ahead.
So I think there's two angles to this. So I think if you talk more about communication protocols, there we need a lot of standardization that it all works. But in the question, I also take a bit of how do you make the hardware physically fit in different places, and we've learned quite a lot, which I think is very relevant for the use case of e-trucks. We've learned a lot from the earlier electrification of e-buses, and typically with e-buses we consider it grey field electrification, that these municipalities that have these city buses already have depots, and you need to somehow make the charging work in their depot. You're not going to build a new depot with new standards at every place. So my take is from the SBRS company that we bought some time ago, that it's you need quite a big ability to customize your solutions to those facilities, that it is energy efficient, that it is investment efficient, that it's safe, that it's so you end up with overhead systems, you end up with all types of technical solutions that at this stage, we do this in 50 cities now. We are market leader in that segment, and we are not close to standardizing that part yet. We are still learning on how to make that work in the best way.
Thank you, Hilmar. And I'm afraid we are close to being out of time. So unfortunately, we'll have to pass on the next question. I would like to still make sure, though, that MEP Dalunde has space for any final remarks or comments that he would like to share. MEP Dalunde?
I would just like to highlight how much this is a catch-22 issue. We have manufacturers of trucks that are ready to sell electric trucks. There is infrastructure ready to invest if there's certainty that that infrastructure will be used. There are consumers who want to buy goods that are shipped in a sustainable way. All the interests are there. It's just up to us policymakers to make sure that all the interests and all the incentives are properly aligned. And if we can just manage to do this, I actually do believe that this entire issue will be easier to solve than we might think. But it needs to be, as politicians, need to be thoughtful, but we also need to be daring to believe that this will actually work. And I think it will.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dalunde. That was actually a perfect summary of the webinar, which I personally very much enjoyed. I hope you all as well. So again, with a very big thank you to all the panelists, Thomas from Arthur D. Little, as well as MEP Dalunde. Really appreciate your insights and your availability for the webinar today. And do stay in touch with us at ChargeUp Europe. Give us a follow on LinkedIn or on Twitter. We look forward to the industry collaboration that everybody was mentioning is very important to be able to really move the green needle on e-trucks and HDV electrification. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.